Good morning, dear students. Today we are going to discuss structure, sign, and play in the Discourse of the Human Sciences by Jacques Derrida. Structure, sign, and play in the Discourse of the Human Sciences was a lecture presented at John Hopkins University on 21st October 1966 by philosopher Jacques Derrida. The lecture was then published in 1967 as a chapter of 10 Writing and Difference. French lecturer La Difference. Structure, sign and play identifies a tendency of philosophers to renounce each other for relying on problematic discourse and argues that this reliance is to some degree inevitable because we can only write in the language we inherit. Discussing the anthropology of Claude Lévi-Strauss, Derrida argues that we are all bricoleurs, creative thinkers who must use the tools and we find around us. Derrida wrote Structure, Sign and Play to present a conference titled The Language of Criticism and the Sciences of Man, held at John Hopkins University in Baltimore from 18 to 21st October 1966. The conference, organized by René Girard and Richard A. Maxey for the newly founded Humanities Center and sponsored by Ford Foundation, brought together a collection of notable French thinkers include Paul Deman, Roland Barthes, Jean Hyppolite, and Jacques Lacan. Michel Foucault was also present in the seminar. Derrida reportedly wrote his essay rather quickly in 10 or 15 days preceding the conference. According to one report, Derrida was a last-minute replacement for the anthropologist Claude Hias. Many attendees came from France and he spoke French during the event. French lecture was translated into English and distributed in print. Derrida's lecture was listed in the program and delivered in French. Lacan was one of the few French attendees to lecture in English. Lacan makes a point of this gesture at the beginning of the lecture titled of structure as a mixing of an otherness prerequisite to any subject whatever. Structure, Sign and Play was first published in English in 1917 within a volume dedicated to the John Hopkins colloquium titled The Structuralist Controversy, The Language of Criticism and the Sciences of Man. Maxey and Donato write in the preface to this volume that the goal of the conference was to clarify the field of structuralism and define some of its common problems across disciplines. Structure, Sign and Play discusses how philosophy and social sciences understand structure abstractly. Derrida is dealing with structuralism, a type of analysis which understands individual elements of language and culture as embedded in structure. Derrida's Structure, Sign and Play was presented when structuralism and its implications were not completely clear. According to Derrida, structuralism was a frenzy of experimentation, not a movement. Instead of arriving at a clear conclusion regarding the fundamental questions of structuralism, the symposium ended up becoming ground zero for the structuralist controversy. The controversy was based on two significant issues that were also fundamental to Derrida's structure, sign and play. The first issue was the impact and consequences of the application of the general theory of science and language systems to all the areas of human sciences. The second issue was the mediations between the subjective and objective judgments. These became the prominent tensions in the structuralist school of thought. Derrida's structure, sign and play uses the fundamental logics of structuralism to argue for a reconciliation of the concept of meaning and interpretations. He attempts to showcase an approach that accepts the absence of a mixed centrality in both meaning as well as human nature. Major influences: Nietzsche, Freud, Heidegger, and Schosser. Derrida's structure, sign and play influenced by Friedrich Nietzsche, Martin Heidegger, Sigmund Freud, and, as mentioned above, by Ferdinand Schosser. Nietzsche was a German philosopher, popular for his ideas of existentialism. With Nietzsche, Derrida shared the doubt in philosophy and its apparently absolute truths. Just like Nietzsche, Derrida was aware how significantly we are influenced and controlled by our perceptions. Both the philosophers attempted to destabilize and reverse the binary pairs such as truth, error, moral, amoral, subject, object, etc. Sigmund Freud. Freud was an Austrian neurologist and was the founder of psychoanalysis. Just like Freud, Derrida questioned the unity of human psyche, as it was always haunted by the subconscious hints of our past experiences. Martin Heidegger. Heidegger was a German philosopher, best known for his contributions in the fields of hermeneutics, hermeneutics, existentialism, and phenomenology. The very term deconstruction comes from Heidegger's concept of distraction. Derrida adopted Heidegger's practice of crossing out a term after writing them. Ferdinand Saussure, as discussed earlier, Saussure was the founder of semiotics. He stated that just like a game of football dictates the actions of its players, our communication within a language is also governed by structure of that language. Structuralism is the core focus of Derrida's structure, sign and play. In his essays, structure, sign and play, sorry, in his essay Structure, Sign and Play, in the Discourse of Human Sciences, Derrida firstly describes the idea of free play, which is a decentering, decentering of systems within the systems themselves. Centering of systems is supposed to limit free play. Yet this centering of systems designed to give coherence to the system is contradictory because it is there by force of desire, not by any fundamental principle. The three major critiques of decentering by Heidegger, Freud, and Nietzsche use the language of metaphysics to break down, critique, deconstruct the principles of metaphysics itself. This paradox is relevant as it applies to the dislocation of culture whether historically, philosophically, economically, politically, etc. The development of concepts are their opposing sides, binary oppositions. Data then, Data then moves into the discussion of Levi-Strauss Bricolage, the necessity of borrowing concepts from other texts, intertextuality of whatever concepts seem handy to give coherence, and intertextual collage. This bricolage leads to the idea of myth, and while it is assumed that all myths have an engineer, Levi-Strauss suggests that the bricolayer invented it, but suspecting the engineer's existence would be to threaten the bricolayer's centered system. Bricolage is not just an intellectual concept, it is also mythopoetical. Yet, for a myth-based concept, it seems to command respect as an absolute source. To go back to an obsolete absolute source, it is important to reject existing episteme, foundations, and sciences. Myth has no author, therefore determining that it requires a source of historical illusion, which brings up the questions. Does this principle, that the absolute source of a historical illusion, also apply to other fields of discourse? Levi-Strauss only brings up this question, and Derrida does not attempt to answer it. Instead, he writes that there is an assumption on many philosophers' parts. To go beyond philosophy is impossible. There is no language beyond what is available. Therefore, there is no language that could explain the outer bounds of centered system. Derrida suggests that to go beyond philosophy, it has to be read in a certain way, not assume there is something beyond it. In his famous essay, Structure, Sign and Play in the Discourse of the Human Sciences, which was read at the John Hopkins International Colloquium, The Language of Criticism and the Science of Man in October 1966, Derrida demonstrated how structuralism, as represented by the anthropologist Claude Levi-Strauss, which sets out as a criticism or rejection of science and metaphysics, can be read as embodying precisely those aspects of science and metaphysics which it seeks to challenge. The essay concludes by saying, there are thus two interpretations of structure of sign and the play. The one seeks to decipher dreams of deciphering a truth or an original which is free and from free play and from other and the order of the sign, and lives like an exile the necessity of interpretation. The other, which is no longer turned toward the origin, affirms free play and tries to pass beyond human and humanism. Thus, we have two diametrically opposite interpretations of structuralism, and we are unable to decide which the right one is. This aporia between two interpretations is due to the force of difference intrinsic to the structure of language. Derrida explains that the concept of structure is an old as concept of episteme, but has never been discussed. And on explaining the structure, he first defines what is a center, an organizing principle that allows for limited play. Therefore, the center that leads coherence and structure into a structure. It at the same time escapes it. Therefore, the paradoxical concept of center being both inside and outside the structure. For example, the center that governs the center escapes its totality at the same time. For example, God is the center of human life and dictates laws, yet at the same time he does not the part of this life. He is absent from the play of human life. Derrida then suggests to call the center as a transcendental signifier. Lastly, he presents the very essence of the center, thereby limiting play. It is mastering anxiety and free play to leads. Final data observes that there are two ways of interpret structure, sign and play. One aims to decipher an absolute truth and avoid play, and the other affirms play. The first was dominant throughout human history, and the second is only emerging now. Play must supersede the alternatives of presence and absence, and hence there is no need to be concerned with the absence of the center or the origin. Play is possible if we can forego our need for truth. It's is possible. It is possible then to have a philosophy without concepts, without orientation, and without coherence. The first thing that comes to our mind when we hear the name of Jacques Derrida are deconstruction, difference, post-structuralism, postmodernism, writing and difference of grammatology, and so on. These illustrates that we are already familiar with Derrida. However, the majority of the people complain about Derrida's complexity of his writings as well as the difficulty of translating his works. One of the most illustrative examples is the preface of Gayatri Chakraborty Spivak to Derrida of Grammatology, in which she states when the preface is being written by someone other than the author, the situation is yet to further complicated. As pretense at writing before a text that one must have read before the preface than be written. Spivak's statement is real example of the inseparable relations between reading and writing. Reading is breathing in, whereas writing is breathing out. Reading is breathing in, whereas writing is breathing out. Alan Bass, a translator of Derrida, suggests that the difficulty to read Derrida is not a question of his style of writing, but rather Derrida challenges the way we are used to read. Besides, Alan Bass compares the translator of Derrida to a psychoanalyst in the sense that the translator must understand the syntax and lexicon of the original text in order to transform it through his own language. This is quite analogous with the attempt of the psychoanalyst to translate the language of dreams to a latent language. Okay, thank you. We'll discuss elaborately in our next lecture. Thank you. Thank you, everybody.